Hi everyone, welcome to Living La Vita Loca podcast, a retro gaming podcast for some of your retro gaming needs. My name is Fazz.
And I'm Rich.
And we are here to do a Freeplay Fortnightly episode, which hasn't been done since the middle of May, I don't believe. So
minor detail.
It's a long fortnight. So we play a video game, and then we review said video game, and then our counterpart will give a score out of 10 based on our review. I don't think we have, we haven't done this in a while, and I know that you said that you enjoy the free play sort of weeks. What is it about having the freedom to play something? What a weird question.
I mean, it's basically exactly that. There are times when I fancy playing something that I've not played because I know I've had to play something else because we've got a pod coming up about it.
Oh no!
And so I've ended up having to play that instead. I'm like, but I was in the mood for the other thing.
It is weird. I've been this week procrastinating. Podcastinating. Yeah. I'll try to get there with that. In so much that I've got at the moment, I guess, at my disposal the most games I've ever had. Like I could pick any game, and we've got a free play coming up in a few weeks, and so I need to play something for that. And I've got a backlog as long as my arm, and I've just been trying to get a better score on Riding 4 all week. I've just been playing arcade shmups all week.
Very proud of you.
So, yeah.
That was great watching those scores come in, though. Just a little bit better each time. And I'm proud of you.
So, just for the record, I wasn't planning on sharing it, but so up to 6,100,000 58th in the world now, so
yeah, definitely thumped my score.
Yeah, but you haven't been on it since, have you?
No, I haven't.
Oh, there you go then. So,
but still, there was that little moment of like, I could, but I knew I had something to play for this. So I was like, you know what, I won't. And
that's the thing. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, as in, I mean, there is a minor obsession with it, but like, as in, also on the flip side of that, like, I've definitely been, I guess, I must have changed which my next free play game is going to be about 16 times, and I'm still not quite settled on it. I've started playing about 3 or 4 different things, and I go, and like you say, this isn't what I want to play. This isn't what I want to play right now. So yeah, it's a fickle mistress, is gaming, and what and what you feel, what you fancy. So right then, this week's free play. Should we rock, paper, scissors?
Yeah, are we showing on 3?
Right, what we should do is we go rock, paper, scissors, and then...
Show.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
yeah.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Right, okay.
Right.
Rock, paper, scissors, show. You win.
I win.
There we go. Scissors cuts paper into tiny little pieces.
It does. So last episode I was talking about Sega Worldwide Soccer, which was on the Sega Saturn.
Yes.
And
I wouldn't mention that really, did we? That much.
We touched on it briefly. But the point is that I had the Saturn set up. So I was like, cool, right, I'm here now. What else can I do? So today I will be talking about Burning Rangers.
No idea.
Yeah, well, you're going to learn. You're going to learn about Burning Rangers.
I'm excited.
So, 1998.
Okay.
And it is made by Sega Team, Sonic Team.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
Can't even read my own notes. In fact, no, I can read my notes. I just called them the wrong thing. That's embarrassing. That famous team from Sega, what everyone knows.
Yeah.
See, the Saturn didn't really get like a sort of big, full-on Sonic game of its own, but it did get this. And basically, it was kind of made as a sort of response to a lot of the violent video games of the period. And they went, well, why don't we do it so that instead of killing people, you're rescuing people?
Okay.
So the whole idea is you go into a level, you fight fires by shooting it with guns, and then go and find people and save them and go beat a boss, and that's that.
What kind of game is it?
Well, this is the thing. It's kind of like a 3D action platformer type thing. There are a couple of moments where you can definitely feel that kind of Sonic DNA, because you'll be like barreling down a corridor or something like that with stuff exploding all around you, and it feels quick and fluid, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see where this has come from. But yeah, so the idea is that, well, my wife was watching me play it and was asking about it because it struck her as something unusual.
Yeah.
And she said, so basically you're like a kind of Japanese version, like an anime version of International Rescue, Thunderbirds.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, actually, yeah, that's basically it.
Okay.
And like Saturn intros, I love. Like this goes so big on like the Saturday morning cartoon vibes. Everything's in that kind of 90s anime, like hand-drawn style.
Yeah.
It's got its own theme song, which is legitimately incredible. Oh my God. It's so cheesy. I just couldn't help but fall for it, very, very quickly. So yeah, like on paper, the game is reasonably straightforward. And you'll go into a level. They vary in size, but they're kind of segmented. There's like 4 missions, but each of them are kind of made up of various different bits. You go in, you find people, you have to rescue them by effectively kind of, and because I was playing it in Japanese, I don't actually know the ins and outs of what's going on with the plot or why it's like this, but you effectively have to pay an amount of crystals to rescue someone. So I think it's like powering a transporter type thing.
Yeah.
And to get
classic transaction.
Yeah, and to get the crystals, you have to take out fires and later on big stompy robots and stuff like that. All the while, you've kind of got this counter or set of counters, I guess, going at the top of the screen that show how much kind of the environment around you is degrading.
Oh. Okay.
And so like when it hits like say 20%, 40%, 60%, you'll have a couple of moments of like shit just explodes around you and you have to try and dodge these explosions and stuff like that. And as you fight more fires and rescue more people, the counter will drop, but it will never drop below that last kind of 20% checkpoint, if you like. So that kind of element of peril is always there, and it's always kind of creeping up, and then it's how well you manage that as you go through the levels.
All right, okay.
And everything's scored, so it sounds like it's not a particularly big game. It only took me a handful of hours to sit there and plow through it the first time, but the ends of the missions are scored.
Yeah.
For how much, how many people you saved, how much fire you fought, how well you kind of manage the environment, I guess. So like you can go back in and replay it, and not only that, but when you do replay it, certain bits of the levels, like switches or the survivors you can rescue, things like that, will be randomized a little bit, so it does play out a little bit differently. I did see, I think it was on Sega Retro, someone reckoned that it meant that you had about 3,125 potential routes through the game.
What?
I'm not sure how that quite works, but there are like 100 or so survivors. It keeps a log of who you've rescued.
Yeah.
And there are some cameos in there and stuff like that. Like the kids from Nights into Dreams, I think, are in there, and stuff like a couple of the developers and things like that. And occasionally you'll get like little messages sent by the survivors afterwards, which if you read Japanese is probably a really interesting insight into the universe, but I have no friggin' idea. But I have seen that you can get like, say, concept artwork or, cheat codes even to play as different characters and stuff like that, because you do have a choice of character. And I think there are some slight variations in the story, but I don't really know. But the point is that like, it's a reasonably straightforward playthrough, but it is designed to play through it a few more times.
I was going to say, could you choose a level of difficulty, do you think?
Good question.
Or is it just a arcade?
It feels kind of arcadey. How much of a bearing any of the different characters would have on it, I'm not entirely sure about, if I'm being honest. But the whole thing's quite unusual. Like the whole setup is unusual. So it wouldn't be a surprise to, if there were some options in there for like batshit mode and all that kind of stuff. Because like it does a very effective job of making the environment feel like it's coming down around your ears. For better and worse, because like there are some bits later on where the ambition for the level is clearly greater than the capabilities of the Saturn. Like there's this one bit where you go underwater, there's like a kind of glass tunnel and stuff like that, and the whole thing is just an utter mess to look at. It's really difficult to navigate, and it's almost nauseating. Watching everything kind of shimmer and wobble, and you're trying to find where you're meant to be going in all this, and everything kind of looks the same.
Worst effects in that early late 90s 3D thing where it's like, oh, you just go wobble the screen to make it underwater. You're like, what?
And like some of the environments get a little bit bigger, but the way they're laid out, you can end up with like certain individual blocks of the environment not like spawning in when the rest of them do, and they're just kind of blacked out and all that kind of stuff. And you can kind of see why like the N64 would always use fog for stuff like that to cover up those kind of cracks. So yeah, it's got a couple of little oddities like that, and it's also got quite a narrow field of view on your character. And weirdly, it was a similar issue to when I was playing Worldwide Soccer the other week. Because I was using a digital control pad, it meant that, say, controlling the camera and things like that wasn't quite as fluid as it could have been if I was using the analog controls. So yeah, like it's kind of unusual, and it definitely does its own thing. And I couldn't help but sitting there thinking, like, what if someone remade this? Why has nobody tried to have another crack at this? And like you say about difficulty levels and stuff like that, implement some stuff like that and some extra challenge, some, greater variety of maps, say, and all that kind of thing. Twin stick controls, anything like that. I mean, look at what they did with Panzer Dragoon and the kind of update for that. You can't help but wonder if they'd have been onto something if they gave it a sort of similar treatment. So yeah, like it's fun. Everything's kind of agile, nimble. At least the character I played as was, and you could kind of see some of that Sonic DNA, like I mentioned earlier. It's not a Sonic game, but I think, and I'm going to think very carefully before I say this next bit. Yeah, no, I did prefer it to most of the Sonic games I've ever played.
Okay.
There is. Yeah, no, I'm comfortable with that. There's just something about it that has a kind of charm, and it's little things as well. So like, there's no map for when you're rescuing people. The whole idea is that you radio for like directions to your kind of central base. So you have a button on the controller that you press. You have a dedicated button for asking for directions.
Oh, okay.
So now I know my Japanese left and right, which is handy. And yeah, it's little things like that that I don't think the game itself is particularly complicated or particularly what's the word I want here? Like, ambitious is the wrong word, because it is ambitious in its way, but it's not like a kind of a big grand adventure type thing. I mean, it is. You go places and do stuff, and as best I can tell, the plot takes a kind of hard left, but at the same time, if you've watched any anime from the 90s, you'll see it and be like, oh yeah, that tracks. But at the same time, like, there is just this kind of charm to it. It does enough different to get your attention and keep it.
Sounds like a little hidden gem.
I think so. It's one of those ones that if you are looking at lists of, well-regarded Saturn games, it's usually in the mix. And I think for me, what was particularly telling is the fact that it's usually in the mix, and I played it in Japanese and had no idea what was going on, and still think I agree with that statement. And so it feels to me like, the kind of the plot, the character acting, all that kind of stuff just feels like it might be a kind of cherry on top, of what is quite a nice, if not hefty, gaming Sunday.
Had you played it at all before?
No. Like, I picked it up a while back. I'd maybe sunk about 20 minutes, half an hour into it, and was like, I'm going to save that for the podcast one day. And took me about a year to get around to it. And I'm glad I did. Yeah.
No, that sounds really intriguing. I mean, I think, as I've always said before, and I was just saying, I was speaking into the internet about this literally the other day, where it was like sort of, it was like, about the length of games and, you know, on what makes, you know, perfect game girth, as we spoke about previously in the pod and stuff. And you know, like, it sounds as though in this circumstance, especially with the replayability around the scoring system and stuff, that actually, you know, it sounds like you've had a really good experience in, you know, in one day, and yeah, just
yeah, it came down to that kind of thing that I've realised recently, that I like games that value my time.
yes, you
And
mentioned that about, like, that's your arcade kick as well, isn't
yeah,
it?
it is, and I think, especially, you know, being Sonic Team, and they kind of appreciate that element to it, and I think it definitely helped because you know it is a reasonably short experience. And I've just spotted the note to myself about, like, there are bosses in it, but they're hardly the main event. They're reasonably,
which is always good,
reasonably
that's always
straightforward.
nice.
Yeah, they're just kind of there. It's almost like a punctuation mark at the
Yeah.
end of the level, and like there was some challenge there. But as a first playthrough of it, I would hesitate to say it was a difficult game. But like you were saying about difficulty, I imagine that actually where a lot of the difficulty comes is then challenging yourself to go back in and go, well, can I fight more of the fires, or can I do it quicker, or can I rescue more people, or some combination thereof, and generally score better, and things like that. So I think it's a sign of good design, as far as I'm concerned, where you can play it in different ways and it will still work. And I think you could play this as a narrative experience, or you can play it as a score chasing thing. So yeah, no, I was pleasantly surprised by it.
Awesome. I am going to honour that with an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
Yeah.
I will pop it on the spreadsheet.
I think that it sounds like it's a very good game. A very, very good game. And I am intrigued to see more. I probably won't get around to playing it, not having a Saturn. But, you know, might have a little dalliance of watching a few videos on the internet or something after that. It completely different game. But, it did make me feel like, oh, quite like, you're right, rescue games are quite fun. I had is it called City Rescue? A game on the PlayStation 1 where you were in a helicopter. And it was like, sorry, PlayStation 2. It was I think it was one of my first PS2 games. And you flew around a city putting fires out and saving people from buildings. And it was, you know, and it's the same sort of thing, you know, you use a radio assistant to find your way around and stuff. And it was, and you scored points for how well you saved people and stuff. And I really enjoyed it, yeah. So that made me feel some sort of, you know, like retro feelings towards that when you were speaking. I was like, oh yeah, they're quite good games, those, you know, where you're not just fucking killing everything all the time.
Yeah, and I tell you what, like because I know it's not me scoring it, but I do have a note on it that says, is this a 10 out of 10 game?
Oh, right, okay.
Because, like, it's not the way to make it nowadays, right? Make exactly the same game nowadays. You would say that actually, on technical level, no, it's not great. There are kind of enough glitches and stuff like that to pull it down a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I knocked it down.
But I think for the Saturn and for the themes that it's doing and the kind of presentation it has, I think there could be an argument for it.
Okay.
And the bit that got me, that I did not mention in the review deliberately, because it would be the bit that tips my hand as to why I would give it a 10 out of 10 score, was, you know, this is a Sega Saturn game. There's one level where you're on a space station. I was running along, and then suddenly one of the walls to the outside, the vacuum of space, collapsed open, flew off into space, and started dragging me out of the space station.
Oh, really?
On a fucking Saturn game. And I was just sitting there going, holy shit, like, this is insane. And it was just that moment where I was like, you know what? Like, kudos. Because this is like a good 3/4 of the way through the game now, and you're still throwing a set piece like that at me. And it's the kind of thing that you just get the impression that the developers worked out how they could do it, and were so pleased with themselves. I was like, you know what, fair play. And it was exactly that kind of thing where I just felt like there was a bit of it needed a bit of a tip of the cap. It was time I showed it some love. So.
Is there do Saturn games regularly get overlooked for best game ever lists and stuff? Because, you know, I personally don't see a lot of them in there, but I'm guessing there must be some.
The Saturn's kind of, over the last few years, I think, has undergone a bit of a reevaluation anyway. Okay. And a lot of people had previously written it off as a failure and stuff like that. Whereas I think a lot of people nowadays are more inclined to look at it and go, actually, it was mishandled in in America and Europe, sure, but in Japan, at least, it was awesome and had some really, really good stuff on it. And I think it's probably helped by the fact that the genres it excelled at, and all you have to do is look at the standard controller and the 6-button layout to know that it's going to be good at fighting games and it's going to be good at shooting games.
Yeah.
And those two genres have both, I think, come back into vogue a little bit more recently. And I'm not just saying that because I like those genres. But I think that has helped people take a bit more notice of it. It's also not helped by the fact that when it comes to best game ever lists and stuff like that, you'll have things like Tomb Raider is a really good example, because Tomb Raider will quite often pop up. It came out on the Saturn first, but everybody remembers it as a PlayStation game.
Yeah, you do.
Because that was the popular one. So I think the Saturn is kind of knocking at the door a lot of the time. But
let me in.
But at least in Europe,
fuck off, Sega.
in Europe and America, it never seems to be the one that kind of breaks through. And quite often, like say with Symphony of the Night as well, it also popped up on the Saturn, but the version was a little bit different. In some ways, technically not as good, but it added in more like content. There are a couple of extra bits of content in there. So it'll be the kind of thing where the Saturn kind of has a bit of a shout, but I think it would be a hard sell to look at most of the console exclusives and go, no, that is one of the best games ever. Because so many of them ended up getting ported other places as slightly tweaked or slightly better versions of stuff.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. I knew you'd have one in you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure I believe most of what I've just said, if I'm being honest. I feel like I'm missing something. That someone will go, oh, but Nights into Dreams. And it's like, yeah, but that kind of got ported everywhere anyway and stuff like that. Whereas Burning Rangers didn't.
I guess that's what I was possibly looking for, was what are the Saturn gems and do they ever get shouted about? And,
people will happily shout at you about them. I'm not versed enough on the Saturn to be able to do it. But Burning Rangers is certainly one of those ones that pops up on a lot of the lists. And yeah, if you have the opportunity, I would strongly recommend trying it.
So I haven't discussed this with you yet, but I was thinking, and I'm only thinking out loud because this sounds like, I'll give it an 8, and you might be like, I could slide it up maybe. Like, I'm thinking when we go back, so people that haven't listened to podcasts or anything, last year we retro ranked our scores for the year in 2023 into which were the best games in each score bracket. So if you got a 6 out of 10, which was the best 6 out of 10 game that we played all year. And I was thinking this year we maybe pick, and because we played so many games, I started with one in my head, but I was maybe like thinking there could be 2 or 3 games where actually you could say, I want to move that up or down 1 mark. Maybe there might have to be some sort of but I might have to move, if I'm going to move 1 up, I might have to move 1 down. Just food for thought. So, halfway-ish through the year, it might be that, because I've already got 1 that I want to move around a little bit. But, I understand that there might be a cost to that as well. So we'll hash that out, I think.
Yeah, I'll mull it over a little bit. Because I'm sure there'll be a couple that we look at again and be like, well, actually, we've played a load of stuff since that is better.
It might be something that you've personally scored, or it might be a Freeplay Fortnightly that you've scored for me, or vice versa, and you might go, actually, I didn't really agree with that score at all, and I maybe need to move it around a little bit. And I think there should be a little bit of, manipulation in play. So, just want to think about as we go for the year. My game then, a couple of little related threads then. So I've got a 3-day, actually a 1 day. The thread that you kind of mentioned really was that you could
sweet top up, get more sweets.
Get those cola bottles out. I believe that you can finish this game in a day if you sat down and played it all day. And it's a 3D action adventure game. So from 2001, so similar-ish sort of era. Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry.
Nice.
I have never played a Devil May Cry game before. And everyone in my free plays is always like, oh, these are games that everybody's played. And I'm like, I've never played this before. I'm a terrible game, I've told you. I don't know why I've got a gaming podcast.
Don't follow the herd.
Yeah, but it's just, I think the reason that I've never really played Devil May Cry is because similar reasons for like Castlevania and stuff. It's just not really my style, like the gothic sort of, like, do you know what I mean? Like, like I like punk, I like pop punk rock kind of thing. I like, upbeat sort of like, not emo, like as in like kind of sliding down towards the sort of, Devil May Cry sort of area, if you will. But I really enjoyed myself with this game. Like, again, spoke about it, like length of games, like, and how well they value your time. I felt that this really did a good job of valuing your time when you spent with it. So, Devil May Cry for the one people out there like me, they've never played Devil May Cry before then. So, it's fantastic at getting you straight into the game. It goes absolutely hell for leather. Like, it starts off with Dante, the main protagonist, smashing through the what do you want to call it when it's like the violence gore warning screen, like with his sword. It's like, oh, warning, there is violence and gore, and he's like, all right, I'll smash up the sword. I'm like, all right, okay, see how this is gonna go. Made by Capcom. So I figured that in my head I was a bit like, I remember watching my friend play at the time, like when it was first out, and I played the HD version, so which actually, weirdly enough, didn't look that great, I thought, for a HD version of a game. So it looked better than the 2001, but not necessarily much more than that. Yeah. And I wonder if that was something they just kind of consciously said, actually, we'll just brush it up a little bit, and just so it's not offending to your eyes. But actually, it still looked like a PlayStation 2 game, I'd say, pretty much. But yeah, it kind of like. I thought it might be a bit Resident Evil-y, and because I was like,
start out as Resident Evil 4 or something like that.
Well, oh yes, yeah. So I thought it was going to be a bit Resident Evil-y, and that is very quickly, I'd say, squashed almost. Yeah. So it does go hell for leather, like as in like the setup, if you will, of the plot is you're Dante, you're a demon hunter, you are the son of the Dark Knight Sparda, the Mundus is the bad guy who killed your family, and there's this mysterious sort of like partner person, Trish, who leads you off to a really weird, mysterious island called Malay Island, and then leaves you alone and a castle.
And off.
And that is it. There's nothing much more to that really. And you're like, okay, and then out of nowhere, all these like really weird rabid monsters just kind of like start coming at you and stuff, and you're like, all right, okay. Better fight you then. So, it is a action combat game of, I guess, the earliest sort of varieties. Maybe I would think, where it feels like, is there like, I guess, is this the first hack and slash sort of game? Maybe.
I guess it depends.
Have a think.
How you're defining these things.
It feels definitely in that era of one of the first hack and slash games. And the great thing about this is that it does such a good job of incorporating gunplay and swordplay together that you do have to dive into a menu to change your weapons from different types of swords and different types of guns. But when you are in the gameplay, like, I was so impressed at how well you could change from having your pistols that are effectively I guess they're sort of magnums, probably, are they? And
they're big.
Yeah, big guns, big pistols, and having your your big sword, your Buster sword, if you will, like as in, and yeah, being able to dual wield pistols in 2001, it was just the in thing. It was just a cool thing to do, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Everyone was doing it.
It is never not cool, like to dual wield pistols and then have a sword also, like as in. Dante is a character. I haven't played in obviously in the rest of the games, and I definitely understand from the gaming world that he develops as a character and people like him. In this one, he's a bit weird, like as in so like I wouldn't say I warm to him like at all, like as in so, which is I would say counterintuitive to what I've seen most of the reviews of this game. A lot of people say, like they quite like him. I think he's not a dick either. It's just odd. Like there's a point later on in the game where he's speaking to Trish, like very late on in the game, and he's like, and he saves her life, and he's like, and she's like, oh, why did you do that? And he's like, oh, you remind me of my mother, like quite softly, And then she starts talking to him as he's walking away, and it's like, but you're not my fucking mother! And pretty much, and it's just like, Dante, are you okay? Like, dude, like, I don't understand, like, what? Like, you're on crack. Like, it just always seems a bit off kilter, this game, and it's not just Dante. Like, as in, so you know, it is this hack and slash combat game. You spend most of your time defeating what I'd call minor enemies. They're not that minor. Like, they do take quite a bit of beating up, but actually on normal difficulty for somebody that isn't necessarily drawn to anything like of the Souls like games where you spend time sort of moving around and maneuvering around enemies and hacking and slashing at them. So I'm not very akin to doing it. Like, I didn't find this too difficult at all. Like, as in, I completed the game and didn't really struggle. Like, as in, against any of the enemies. Like, even there was a couple of the bosses where I was a bit like, I just need to spend some time working out what to do here, and I probably die once or twice. But actually, it wasn't any point where it was like, oh my god, this is a real drain on me, on my resources and energy and stuff. So
it become a slog.
Yeah, which is good because aesthetically, it's what.
Brown,
yeah, like dour.
Dour. That's a good word. Yeah,
you know,
like,
as in, and it's like, I know it's meant. They do a really good job of, and I used this just 2 minutes ago, of keeping you off kilter, making you feel a bit weird. Like, the music is a bit weird, the sound effects are a bit weird, but I'm saying this from a positive point of view. Like, it's almost a bit of like minor freak out. Like, at one point it sounds like there's like, I don't know, like really sad llamas in the background. Just like, I don't know if that's like they're just like the guy who's doing the score.
What does that sound
We're just like punching a llama in the side. Like, I don't know. Like,
sure.
So, but. And you think, like, you know, when you get these giant jesters with these scissor hands coming out at you and scaring you and stuff, and like the doors have like got these weird grabby hands coming out at you and stuff, and like you are in, and clearly you are meant to be in a nightmare, like, as in, but they do a good job of counteracting that because the combat's so breezy, if that makes sense. Like, as in, you always feel like a badass, like, as in, just like, you know, and to see a company go from having Resident Evil, having tank controls, to literally a couple of years later having you somersaulting through the air, like, you know, with sort of like casting spells out of like sort of, you know, your sword and stuff. It's just like, wow, that part of it's really refreshing, and I like the juxtaposition of feeling weird and odd and a bit dragged down, and then almost being uplifted by the combat and the system and then the gaming and stuff, the gameplay. You know, it was weird. Like, you know, I keep saying the same thing over and over, but it is, you know. So yeah, it was a sort of a bit of an off kilter game. You know, and the part of that combat that I really liked as well, that it gave you that positive feedback loop, was almost like, you know, beat the shit out of some enemies, fill up your devil trigger, get some cool sort of skills to use, and then refill your devil trigger. And it just did build that positive feedback loop of, I'm enjoying beating the shit out of these things, like, and, you know, and I will continue to do it. And another thing that was a bit of a thread also with Burning Rangers was that it's in missions, that is, in which I find that, again, that's just a very strange thing. But then, if you put yourself in Dante's mindset, because he is a demon hunter, you can almost see him being on a mission. Like, this part of the castle is my next mission, so I can see why it kind of does. It does set up in that way, like, as in, you know, like
it kind of tracks.
And you know, and you get a score, and there's a scoring, effectively a kind of scoring system where you gain red orbs, and that's the game's currency, and you use orbs to upgrade your weapons and your skills, or you can get health power-ups and things, and that's really cool. That is in that never feels tiresome or anything. You know, that there might be a time or two where you're like, oh shit, I've spent my red orbs on the wrong thing. Like, I said, like, I needed something better than this. Like, and that's where you kind of think, you know, I probably should have done a better job of thinking about what was coming up, which is always something to kill you.
Something with teeth.
Yeah. You know, like there's a good mix of enemies as well. So whilst I'd say probably the start of the game, you kind of get like 2 or 3 types of enemies, and then you get sort of bosses as well. It never gets to that point where you're like, oh, I'm seeing too much of this enemy, I'm seeing too much of this enemy, like, as in, or I'm bored of this type now. I think they probably just spend the right amount of time on each one of them, and then move on. You know, the bosses. So this is what I was trying to allude to about it not just being Dante that's weird. There's like they bring the bosses back a couple of times, and there's like a phantom sort of spider, and he's kind of got a bit of sass about him. He's like, what does he say? Recess is over, boy. That's how he says it, and you're like, what? I don't get it. Like, it's in like, I can just imagine Dante just like, that's why he's like a bit like, huh? That's why he's weird, because the bosses are weird. And like another boss later on, like called Nightmare, like it looks like a bit of a mecha beluga whale environmental disaster all rolled into one. And I just like the big giant spider, fair enough, I get that, that's kind of like a bit of a trope by now and stuff, but it's like a lava ooze spider, so it's got like a cool twist on it. But then you like Nightmare is just like a fucking amorphous blob. But then and then you're like, all right, I get the idea, this amorphous blob coming for me, and you don't know what it quite could be. But then this big weird shiny lump comes out of it, and you're like, a whale? Like, are you a whale? And then you're like, how do I attack you? Oh, you've got a spinning orb in your back? Like,
standard procedure.
It just feels like I imagine like some people like working on the game, like the boss was like, oh, that's a really cool enemy. I like this boss. Oh yeah, you know, like, as in what kind of vibes he got? Recess is over, boy. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, what's your boss? It's kind of a weird whale like mess bullshit. Yeah. Just throw it in. Don't worry about it. So, yeah. I mean, I think that it doesn't outstay its welcome. I think I played it for about 8 hours. And I completed it in that time, and yeah, you know, like, as in, I think the last boss was a bit of a letdown, Mundus, like, as in, you know, and I'm speaking from the point of view that clearly he must come back in other games and stuff, and blah blah blah, and obviously the story.
Funnily enough, I'm hurriedly trying to Google my way through and being like, can I remember the end of this game?
But yeah, it's a bit of I'd say the ending is a little tad of a letdown. But yeah, it kind of had. I think this game had its hooks in me, like, as in you know, in a non-nightmarish way. Oh, that was another thing towards the end of the game though, and I'm going to spoil it. Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler. Like, is it? So I don't think I remember Dante and Trish arriving at the island on a plane. And maybe they're doing a cutscene, but they escape on a plane, but the plane falls through the ceiling and lands at their feet really handily to escape from the island. It's just like, you know. Oh, and there's some really annoying bits that I didn't have this in my notes, and that's why I was like trying to remember that. It just come back to me. Like, there's like a cool pirate ship sort of boss battle against a raven and stuff, but before that, you've got like a first person swimming through water, shooting like a dart gun at enemies, and the controls for that are terrible. That is like, how have we gone from the swashbuckling, amazing combat to being like, you know, I've got to use these weird controls to shoot a dart at like this enemy underwater? Like, just again, I definitely feel like when they were developing this game, they've let someone, like, you know, like an intern, like, as in, you design that boss and you let him say whatever he wants. That's okay, son. You know, as in, and also you can do this underwater bit, and it's just like, you know, it could have been tighter, is what I'm trying to say. Like, as in, a little bit. That's fair. But that's not to take away from it to say that it had this funky vibe about it that I was like, yeah, I'm. It's making me feel something all the time, whether that is that I'm like overjoyed by the combat, or that I'm a bit like terrified of the bosses, or that I'm just bemused by the bosses, or
evocative.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, and when I say it out loud, it's 23 years old.
Yeah. Well, I just checked. Was it like 2001?
2001. Like, 23 years old. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's an old game now. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't. I know I played the HD version, so there will have been some polish on it and stuff like that. But I think that generally, that is in, even the controls seem to be the same as what they were in the actual version. I don't think a lot had changed. So that's a positive, really. So yeah, it just felt like it felt like I was at a buffet and I was snacking on lots of little good different bits, and some of them were weird bits, but there was enough good bits to stop the weird bits tasting weird. I wonder every time I said the word weird.
So the reason that I was just hurriedly Googling and checking stuff on my phone was while you were talking, I was desperately trying to get my brain cells to rub together and remember when I played through it, because I played through the HD version as well. And I very, very quickly found that everything that I was remembering about the game was, in fact, Devil May Cry 3. Which, you know, if you enjoyed this, I would highly recommend. Devil May Cry 3 is awesome.
You say your words and I'll then I won't butt in.
So the problem is that, you know, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to score it based on what you've said, but
you don't have to.
Well, I'm not going to, because I know how good Devil May Cry 3 is. So yeah, I'm gonna go with a 7. For no real reason other than I know what that series can do later on. Okay. It's a great start. It is. But yeah, it's. I remember there being some, like you were saying about the plane and stuff like that. There is a fine line to tread between campy, awesome ridiculousness and just laziness. Yeah, and I do think it hews quite close to it occasionally. But it is a very solid framework for what is to come.
It's a real, like, it's an odd feeling where I don't think, it sounds weird, I said it has its hooks in me. I don't think I warmed to the game at any point. Do you know what I mean?
That's like, interesting.
I don't think I warmed to it. But it felt good to play. How can that exist as a sentence? I don't know, but they are my feelings. It was just interesting that you were saying about Devil May Cry 3, because I picked this up on the Xbox store, and I think it just seems to come off all the time, but the HD collection, and then with 4 special edition.
Oh, nice.
£11.50 for four games that, as far as I'm aware, and obviously you've just alluded to as well,
Devil May Cry 2 is a little bit iffy. Checked out that one.
Yeah, which is you know, it happens, doesn't it, in game series and stuff, but in general. And then it's had a reboot as well, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Which really, I'm so annoyed looking at the name of that game. DMC, Devil May Cry, is the reboot. Do you know how hard that is to then Google and research things? And then it's had the 5th one recently, and again that's on offer at the moment. I think you can get that for like £8, and apparently that's really good. The 5th one, and a lot of people, when I was looking around thinking, right, what's the best Devil May Cry game? And a lot of people now saying 5 is the quintessential Devil May Cry game. Have you played that?
You know what? No, I haven't. But I have heard similar, that it's held in high regard.
Yeah. So I think that even though it had all these janky, strange, kooky bits to it, and it wasn't perfect and stuff, like you say, it is a good start, and it has made me think. You know, it's obviously difficult for us, as we were speaking about right at the start of the podcast. It is difficult to kind of pick up the games that you want to play or don't want to play and stuff, and there is a fine balance for. I absolutely love doing this podcast with you. This and speaking these words into the ether. And I don't think on one hand, I would have played Devil May Cry without having the podcast to do that. On the other hand, when will I ever get to play the next Devil May Cries? Because we've got games to play for the podcast. So there is a fine balance to be had of what it means to us and how it affects us, our gaming lives, if you will. But at the same time, without it, would I be playing these games at all? I probably would never have picked up Devil May Cry. Not because I didn't ever want to play it. I just think that it was like an opportunity to be like, oh, this is, I think that people will want to hear a doofus in 2024 try and explain his way through his first play of Devil May Cry. And Rich go, uh-huh.
So many sad llamas punched
You're like, what is wrong in this background? I don't understand. And they're just trying to like beat the shit out of a beluga whale. Okay, so that was a nice little introspective at the start and in there, also. So might have a guest next time. Trying to work on that, and yeah, and we'll do maybe a little bit some more sporty stuff over the summer. I don't know why summer feels like a sport time. It just does. Like, isn't because outside is accessible.
Yeah.
So let's play games inside.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for listening, guys.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.